everything together, which is, it's 25 hikes that will make you a better birder. And so I want to talk a little bit about, how the book came to be, and then go through some of the portions of the book, because this isn't a book that you're going to be able to go look at a bookstore or check out at a library. It's only at this point available in an ebook format. And so, as you mentioned, Carl, we met probably almost a decade ago. I actually pitched the idea for this book in the fall of 2010. I pitched it it was an idea that I had been sitting on, that I really felt like there was a need for a book that really addressed how I like to go birding, which is really emphasizing the way I pitched it was that focuses on the aesthetics of birding, that gets people into locations that are gorgeous. Because for me, so much of birding is about really observing the animals in the wild and having a pretty location to do it in. And the publisher immediately and rightly so asked, who's going to be your target market for this book? And I don't think I had really thought about that too much, other than the fact that I really did see this as being, kind of beginner birders. One of the things that I felt like, when I talked to people about birding, that there were a lot of closet birders out there, and people that maybe wouldn't associate themselves as being bird watchers, but, with as many people that do it, that would be, in terms of getting beginning birders into a place that they could learn at their own pace. So 2010, I was still teaching full time at the Community College of Aurora. Life got in the way. The publisher, it was kind of a big overhaul in the publishing industry at that time. It was a big push for Amazon, big push in self-publishing. And that publisher actually went out of business. They're no longer in business. And so I kept sitting on this idea of, how do I reach this demographic of beginning birders? Because, if you're already associated with Audubon or with Denver field ornithologists or Colorado field ornithologists, you probably already associate yourself a little bit with birding. And I knew there was a market out there. So you mentioned birding and beers. Another idea that came up not too long after the book idea was Denver Audubon was already doing birds and beers trivia. I was seeing other birds and beers groups, but what I didn't find was an organization that was combining bird watching with craft beer, where we were actually going out at this time. And this was in 2012. I didn't know of any other group locally that was really getting out and birding. And so I thought, a meetup was a good platform, started a meetup group, thought maybe I'd get 2 or 3 people. And as you know, Carl, it became incredibly popular from the get-go. We have over 1,100 members now. And it's that demographic that I was hoping to reach. I get people that have never used binoculars before. I get people that say, I'm kind of a little bird curious, but I'm much more interested in beer. This seems like a welcome, I don't know if I have the right gear. So taking that information of leading these bird hikes where I'm out, pre-COVID, I'd be out almost once a month, sometimes more than that, with a large range of birders, really started formulating the ideas behind the book. And yet I still couldn't find the time. So along comes last year, March of 2020, and my travel company that was 15 years in business got, completely impacted by COVID. And so all of a sudden I had this time and I didn't quite know what I was going to do. And I'd been talking, I was like, how am I going to use this time in a positive manner? And I had several friends say, get the book, write it now. And so we were able to get it done. I got to work with some really great friends. And so I'm going to talk today a little bit about, it changed a little bit from that initial pitch. But the thing that I get asked so often is, how do I become a better birder? How do I get better? I will say, don't take hints from my 2 boys here. If you want to become a better birder, binoculars are good, but maybe you actually try to get a bird in the field of view. They tend to like to goof off a lot with their binoculars. And so here they are, trying to see how close they can get each other's faces in binoculars. They actually, in all of this, have become quite good birders. But one of the things that I found is, with anything, with any skill, a way to get better is to practice. If I want to become a better musician, I have to practice. If I want to become a better writer, I have to practice. Whatever it is, whatever the skill set is, you have to practice. And, I'll take beginning birders out or people that are new to Colorado. and we'll be on a bird hike and maybe a northern flicker flies by and I've caught the undulating flight and I see that big white rump patch and I say northern flicker. I'm like, how the heck do you know that? How could you possibly have seen that? Well, it's practice. And so the thing that came out as we started really diving into the idea for this book was, to become a better birder, it's not about building a bigger life list. It's not about listing and twitching. It's about learning the common stuff. It's the emphasis for me, really what came to be in writing this book was focusing on the common species and getting to know them well and learning where you find them, getting to know the habitats. Because once you start familiarizing yourself with those common species, the uncommon stands out. And as you get better, as as a robin becomes a robin every time you see it, as a northern flicker becomes a northern flicker every time you see it, you build that confidence. And I'll come back to this at the end of the discussion, where that confidence, kind of leads to more incentive to keep learning. And so one of the things also with this book is I knew it had to really incorporate the habitats. So, and I think there's probably going to be a little bit of delay here. So as I start talking, as I change these slides, my background, I went to Texas A&M University. I was a wildlife major at Texas A&M, and I went to grad school here in Colorado. And I knew by the time I left Texas A&M that I wanted to study birds. And I wanted to study birds. I did not want to study plants. I didn't do well in botany. I wasn't really that interested in plants. But what I found over time is that if you don't know the plants, it really does limit your ability to kind of predict what you should see. So if I'm in Colorado and I'm birding in the montane shrubland ecosystem or life zone, and I've got gamble oak, which is really, there may be one other oak, but it's certainly the most common oak we have in Colorado, I know that I should be looking for sparrows and things like the spotted towhee in the understory. Most of the trees in the state of Colorado are evergreen trees. Well, gamble oak is a deciduous tree. And so that leaf drop that happens every fall accumulates this leaf litter underneath that becomes a really rich landscape for insect prey. And so it's a great habitat for towhees and other sparrows. And so if you're hiking in this landscape, oftentimes if we're just hiking with a purpose of covering distance, all you're hearing are your feet, right? You almost have to stop and listen. And I'll do this a lot with bird groups. So I'll stop people when we're in this area. I'm like, listen. And all of a sudden you'll hear this, and I'll say, let's find out. And it sounds much bigger than what it is. A lot of times people say, I've heard that before. I thought it was a bear because it sounds big. Well, it's a towhee or some of the smaller sparrows kicking in that understory. And so as you start learning the plant communities, you can kind of start telling yourself, I expect to see, different species as we go through. And if I go up in elevation and I move up into, say, Ponderosa Pine forest, Ponderosa Pine being the longest needled pine in the state. It also has the widest elevational distribution in the state. When I move into Ponderosa Pine, I may still see those spotted towhees. In fact, I could have used on that previous slide a photo of a towhee in a Ponderosa Pine tree. I find that being very, very common. But when I get into Ponderosa Pine, let's say I want to go up to Genesee, as soon as I get out of the car, almost guaranteed, I'm going to start hearing this rubber ducky squeak. And that rubber ducky squeak are the pygmy nuthatches. And where there's one pygmy nuthatchet, there's more pygmy nuthatches. And so all of a sudden I start expecting different things because I'm now in a different life zone. And it makes it easier to start understanding the relationships between habitat and where those birds are finding themselves. And I wanted to use this particular example. I moved to Colorado in '96. And I was birding quite a bit at that time. It was definitely before eBird. It was definitely before, daily rare bird alerts that come through eBird. And I wanted to, I don't know what I had read. I can't remember what the source was, but I wanted to see a pygmy nuthatch. And a friend of mine and I decided to drive all the way down to Rye, Colorado. It was a couple of hours away to find pygmy nuthatches because we had read that was a good location for them. Well, we were living in Boulder. All we had to do was hike up Chautauqua maybe 10 minutes and get into Ponderosa Pine and we would have had pygmy nuthatches, but I didn't know about that relationship with respect to how to find those things. And so it's one of the things I really tried to hit on a lot in this book is that relationship where you're at in the habitats and what you should expect to see with respect to the common species. Another very charismatic bird that people just, it's one of my favorite birds to watch. I have way too many photos. It's a bird that I'll sit and watch for an hour and it's like no time has passed at all. It's the American dipper. You know, it's our only truly aquatic songbird. And if I want to show somebody an American dipper, if I want to see American dippers, I know I need to go to a very specific place. I need to go to running water that has some turbulence to it. And so the top left photo there is taken up at Lair of the Bears, one of my favorite places to go and see American dippers. And what's interesting is, you know, up until this last year, starting March 16th, I have birded every day except for 2 days since March 16th. I made a commitment then that I was going to bird every day until COVID was a distant memory. I thought it would be a couple of weeks. I was way off on that prediction, but I have managed to get out just about every day. And what I found is that very close to home, just up in, you know, I go birding a lot. I live in Boulder County, so Walden Pond, Sawhill Ponds area is one of my patches now. Is, you know, this morning I went birding with a friend of mine and we had American dippers. And so, you know, they kind of move elevationally throughout the year, but I've now been told that they nest there. And so I'm hoping that just about every time, almost every time I go now, I see an American dipper. And again, because I know I'm in the right spot. I know where the bend in the creek, I should be looking for dippers, and they're going to be within, that particular bird's going to be within a 10 or 15 foot distance from that particular spot because it's the right habitat. Well, so if we relate this, this particular edition of the book is focusing on the Front Range. And this view of the Flatirons is absolutely what brought me to Colorado. It was absolutely love at first sight. I came out to Colorado the first time in '95. A friend of mine had moved out here. She got an apartment in Boulder. I was my senior year in college. Over spring break, another friend of mine and I decided we'd come out and visit Deanne in Boulder. And I remember driving up 36 and we pulled off at the little overlook there just before you get into Boulder, before you take the hill down into Boulder. And I remember seeing the Flatirons and just being blown away by that view. And I turned to my friend and said, I'm going to live here someday. I didn't know how I was going to get here, but I knew I was going to get here. And a year and a half later, I was here and haven't left. I'm so glad that it worked out that I was able to go to grad school in Denver and stay and build a family, all without ever having to leave. And I lived in Denver for several years after living in Boulder, and we moved back up to Boulder County 7.5 years ago. And I still, it takes my breath away on good mornings with these views. Well, those mountains are iconic, but overall, if we think about Colorado and the Front Range, the mountains are central to the diversity here. You know, I talked about one of the ways to be a better birder is to practice. And Colorado is a great place to practice. We're in the top 10 of states for birds. It's a really good place to practice. And those mountains are central to our avian diversity here. You only have to drive 35 miles west of Denver and you gain 9,000 feet in elevation. That's a huge change in elevation over a short distance. And so what that provides is a lot of different habitats that you can go birding in. If you're down at Denver Audubon, which I'll round out the discussion, you get a tremendous amount of bird diversity in that Chatfield Basin. We're going to talk about how the trails ended up skewing a little bit to a certain particular elevational range and combining it with water because that tends to be the birdiest places in the state. So originally, when I was thinking about the idea for the book, I envisioned that the trails would survey really all of the major life zones or ecosystems in Colorado, from the grasslands up to the alpine tundra. But as I started working through it and thinking about, what I want this to do is really set people up for putting them in locations that have a lot of likelihood of bird sightings, I found that wasn't actually going to work. I needed to set some criteria that was going to kind of really put you into super birdie areas. And so what we came away with for this first edition are 25 trails along the Front Range. And so you'll kind of see the clusters here. We kind of subdivide it into 4 regions, Fort Collins and north, and including a trail at Rocky Mountain National Park. And then we have Boulder area west, a higher number of trails in the Denver metro area, which makes sense, and then a handful of trails down the Colorado Springs area. And they skew very heavily to foothills near water. Because when I started going through these criteria, I needed to figure out what are my guidelines going to be for this trail selection. And what I came up with is if we have just over 500 species of birds in Colorado, that's across the board, what could be a good number? And so eBird, which was not in existence when I first pitched this book, or at least I don't think it was, it may have been out at that point. I certainly wasn't using it. I think it was out by that point. But we decided, okay, the eBird checklist for the location has to be 100 or more birds. And because I want to use this as a teaching tool, it's not going to be, I put you on a trail and you need to get from point A to point B and you're going to be covering all this distance. It's more of that slow birding aspect. I kind of figured, when I really feel like I've birded a Walden Ponds really well, I'm usually spending about 2 to 3 hours. So I figured, if we do this to where I keep the distance of the trail to 3 miles or less, 100 or more bird species via eBird, and the big key, going back to the aesthetics, is it has to be a really scenic trail. So that if you get out there and you're a beginning birder and you don't hit a sweet spot and you miss every single bird, you're still going to get a nice walk or a hike in all of this. And so that's where we kind of came out, and there were trails that I thought for sure, there were trails that I knew Lara the bear was going to be in there from the get-go. I love that trail from the very beginning of pitching that book. It was going to be in there. And there were other trails that met the criteria, but when I went and started birding them, it was a ton of traffic noise, or, it wasn't a good looking trail. And, I wanted to tie all of those things in. And so that's kind of how it fell out. And so, the cover of the book, one of the locations in the book is Garden of the Gods. Garden of the Gods, you're hard pressed, right? I mean, I think TripAdvisor rated it as like the most scenic park in the nation, some crazy designation, which means, and it's free, right? So it's always crowded. But the great thing about birding is, and especially at this particular trail on this particular hike, is you don't really see many people when you get away from the central garden, which is what this is a shot of. For the most part on that trail, you lose the crowds pretty quickly, within, a quarter of a mile from the parking lots. You have this great hike through just a beautiful landscape. And at any moment you see Pikes Peak in one direction and the central garden in another direction. And then by the time you end the hike and you're finishing up and you are going through the central garden, because it's certainly worth seeing, you've finished your birding and now you're wrapping it up with hopefully some great sightings of prairie falcons or, Townsend solitaires sitting on the tops of juniper trees or swifts flying overhead. And so, really trying to get the reader into some fantastic locations for birding. And again, emphasizing the common species and the common plants. And so, the idea is there is a plant section in the book and with photos of the common shrubs and trees. And then if I go to this next slide, well, before I get there, I will show you what a cover page looks like for one of the chapters. One of the other things that really I always envisioned for the book, this book is not a field guide. If you're a beginning birder and you're not super familiar with with birds in general, you need a field guide. And there are all sorts of field guides. There are field guides specific to Colorado. There are field guides specific to the Western US. There are field guides specific to the entire US. This is not a book to replace a field guide. But I knew I wanted a featured bird section for each trail. I wanted to take kind of this really what I find interesting anecdotal information for a given bird. I went to grad school at the University of Colorado, Denver. I was lucky enough to work under Diana Tombach, who's a Clark's nutcracker expert. I studied Clark's nutcrackers in southwestern Colorado. The story of the obligate mutualism between a Clark's nutcracker and a limber pine, I don't care if you're into birds or not, it is a fantastic story. And so I could not possibly have written this book without having a trail included that has beautiful limber pine on the trail and talking about Clark's nutcrackers as a featured bird. And so what we came away with, there are only 25 trails, but more than 10% of the birds in Colorado are featured either through, there are 26 featured birds. There is a twofer trail where there are actually 2 featured birds. So there are 26 featured birds. And then within each chapter, there's information that either is talking about ways to distinguish between, maybe different species of swallows, or distinguish between nuthatches, et cetera, to try to draw the reader into, looking at what I think is so fantastic about Colorado's avifauna and the relationship between that habitat and where these things are found. All right. Well, one of the things that was interesting about this is as I'm working on these trails and I'm going through recordings, because, it really is walking you through kind of just like any other trail guide. It's giving you directions on a given trail. As I was working on the book, I'm birding and I'm taking recordings. And as I'm walking through, I'm hearing myself over and over again say, this is a point where you need to change your search image. This is change your search image here, et cetera. And so that's, of course, made its way into the book. And I was lucky enough to work with a good friend as an editor on this, who we've become really big birding friends as well. And the book had already gone through the first round of edits. We were out birding. She'd invited me to go on this bird walk on one of the trails that's in the book. And we get about halfway through the bird walk and she's like, we need to talk about this thing called search image. And my heart kind of sunk a little bit because I knew where she was going. She's like, Sheridan, you talk about search image on every single trail, and yet you don't tell the reader what it is. You're going to need to talk about this thing called search image. What is it? And it was interesting because all of a sudden I realized that, I've been doing field work for years. Since the early 90s, I've worked in a variety of habitats, studying a variety of birds. I've done mammals, and then owning an international travel company. I've gone all over the world to search for just kind of these iconic wildlife experiences. And anytime I'm in the field and I'm looking for things, internally, I have this dialogue about search image. And I don't know where I learned it. As I'm thinking about it I knew this was going to be a hard part of the book because I wasn't exactly sure how to describe it because I couldn't remember where I learned it. I just know I've always said it. And so then I was talking to my partner about it and she said, it's funny, Sheridan. She's like, I'll be out birding with you and I'll see your posture change. And I know you've changed your search image. I didn't know that's what you were doing, but I know you're looking for, and she'll usually ask, or even my kids will ask, are you thinking about owls now? Are we in an owlie habitat? And so it's kind of this inherent way of the way I go birding. So I reached out to a friend of mine who is also a wildlife biologist. He owns a travel company that focuses on African safaris. And I knew I needed to get this section written. We were getting close to the kind of the deadline on the book. It was a Friday afternoon. I sent him a text message and I said, hey, Bill, what do you think about search image? And he immediately fired back and said, oh yeah, we say it all the time. I'm like, well, do you remember where you learned that? Because I still have textbooks from college. It's not in any index. And he said, I don't know where I learned that. But he said, what's interesting is when I'm training guides to lead safaris in Africa, I tell them they need to look through the bush. And that's essentially what we're talking about. The way, if you can learn about habitat, if you can learn that when you're in a gamble oak grove, that a lot of times if the birds aren't right up on top, they're probably on the ground. And so now you need to be looking differently. And that's going to be very different than birding in a mature cottonwood forest where now maybe you're way up, looking way up in the trees. Or if I get into an area like this morning, I was scouting a bird walk because I'm leading a walk at Walden Ponds on Saturday. And I can feel that I've got owls looking at me. Of course, I didn't see any owls, but I know they were there and I'm looking at very differently. And so if you get this book, you'll hear me talk about search image. And I think it's key to becoming a better birder is to notice how the bush changes. To notice when you get into an ecotone where all of a sudden now you're in a riparian area and the vegetation's much more lush. Or if you're, it's really hard for a lot of people to go birding in grasslands because, all of these sparrows hunker down underneath the grass. It's a very different search image than when you're in, maybe Golden Gate Canyon State Park and you're looking up the whole time because the trees are really close to the trail. And so it ended up, I did get the section written, but I do think it's a certain approach to birding in the sense of really assessing habitat and how that relates to how you should be looking for birds through that landscape. So to kind of give an example of that, I want to share Denver Audubon Nature Center trails. That's in the book. I mean, I could not include this particular location because of how birdy that location is. And so I wanted to show you a little bit of kind of what a cover page for a trail would look like. So this is trail number 17. It gives the location, it gives the featured bird. So great blue heron is the featured bird for Denver Audubon Nature Center. It tells you the trail or trails. It gives you the distance. So this one's a short trail, it's a 1.5 mile loop. It gives you the rating and the terrain. The name of the book is Best Birding Hikes, and I do consider them hikes because you're not walking on pavement, but they are really skewed towards easy trails. I'm not trying to, the trails that are rated as moderate or difficult, it's mainly because they're the higher elevation. They're up in the alpine or subalpine, and or there are a lot of rocks. And so I'm saying it's going to be difficult. It's more moderate because you really can't bird and walk on this trail because of the big boulders unless you want to risk falling. I talk about elevation at the trailhead and then the change, the habitats, and then the key plants. And so at the beginning of the book, like for Denver Audubon's trails, you have narrowleaf cottonwood and plains cottonwood. And so at the beginning of the book, there are photos that show that. So before the trail, you can kind of flip through that. Look at the eBird tally, 275 plus species for the Nature Center. It is a fantastic place to go birding. And then it talks about entrance fees. And then, the season, if it's a year round, if it's day use only, that sort of a thing. This is a photo of it from last summer. It didn't look like that last Wednesday, did it, Carl? At all with respect to, so I wanted to show it on a beautiful sunny blue day because we went birding last Wednesday right as a snow system was coming in. And so the pictures are going to be from last Wednesday, but I want to kind of walk you through. So Carl and I decided we were going to get together before today's presentation to go and do the walk together. So we meet at Denver Audubon, and again, I live up in Boulder County, so it's a little bit of a drive. And as I'm kind of getting onto I'm going to drop the name Wadsworth, whatever the exit is, and I'm passing Denver Botanic Gardens, Chatfield Farms, and Chatfield Reservoirs on my left side. And the snow's starting to fall, and I'm thinking, oh, it's probably going to be a really good day for raptors hunting because snow's coming in, and it's just a great location for raptors. And I'm already feeling like a raptor vibe as I'm driving in. I was like, and I mentioned the feeders at spending some time at the feeders, and I'm telling myself the feeders are going to be popping because it's cold and things are feeding. They're going to be feeding pretty heavily before this. So sure enough, I pull in. And I pull into the parking lot, and I think we were the only ones really on the trail, but I pull into the parking lot, and the first thing you see with the Nature Center, for those of you that have been there, is they have right now some really great feeding stations set up, and they've got this platform feeder here. There's a downy woodpecker sitting on there. And then back here, you can't see it in the photo, but there are some suet feeders, and that's popping with nuthatches and woodhouses, scrub jays were there. And I'm seeing, white-crowned sparrows and juncos on the ground. And all of a sudden, I'm getting an idea of what I should expect to see on this hike. And in the book, in this chapter, it says, spend some time at the feeders. Because one, the feeders are really good at producing rare birds throughout the year at Denver Audubon. But two, you're going to start getting a feel for what you should expect to see, what's common. And I'm noticing that the chickadees are coming up, and they're kind of displaying higher up in this vegetation, right? They're kind of perching here and then feeding in. And I always think, what a life, right? Living your life one seed at a time. They come in and they get one sunflower seed and they fly off, they eat it. And they come back and they get one and they fly back and eat it. And then I'm seeing juncos on the ground and I'm seeing other sparrows on the ground. And so I'm thinking, you know, I'm going to have to really start looking. If I'm going to bird in this rabbit brush, I'm going to be looking for a lot of birds on the ground here. Because I want the reader to spend some time. What I have found to be so great about this experience over the last year is how much time I've been able to spend observing birds. So there was a white-breasted nuthatch on the suet feeder that came over and started foraging on, I don't know what the tree is. I don't know if it's a cottonwood or what, but a tree that's right there. And, you know, we have 3 species of nuthatches in Colorado, and all 3 of them are discussed quite heavily in different locations throughout the book. And one of the things that it talks about is that, you know, beginning birders sometimes will confuse nuthatches with woodpeckers because of the kind of their behavior on the trunks of trees. But one real easy way to tell them apart is one's head down and the other one forages head up. And other thing to think about is the white-breasted nuthatches tend to be more common in deciduous landscapes. So right now, these trees don't have any leaves. And so if you're hearing things and you're thinking, gosh, is that a white-breasted nuthatch or is that a red-breasted nuthatch? I can never remember the difference between those calls. Look around and see where you're at. You will get some overlap, but typically the red-breasteds are going to, you know, be in more evergreen areas. And there's one trail in the book where I even talk about that, where I say, you know, here you have a really nice defining line on the trail between a deciduous habitat and an evergreen habitat. Listen for both nuthatches. They're common here, and this is a really good way to kind of ascertain where they are more predictable in their habitat preferences. And they catch seeds. So there was a little knot in this tree. And so watching this nuthatch taking things out, old caches from here was pretty fun. And then I walk over to the other section of the garden. It's a fantastic garden. It's a gold medal. You guys have done just a fantastic habitat with this native plant garden. So I'm over here. And in the book, I talk about, you know, when you walk over here, don't forget to look. There are a whole bunch of telephone wires. Don't forget to survey those wires, because in the summer, it's a really good area for swallows, and kestrels like to be up there. And sure enough, we kind of turn around. I didn't see any kestrels on there, but not, you know, 3 minutes away, we find this kestrel perched on this broken off stump, and look, this huge, I think it's got to be a vole. If we have any mammal experts, feel free to chime in there. I'm not exact. It's big is all I know, and furry. But it had just caught this vole, and sure enough, you know, it was like I kind of already was expecting this kind of binge eating as we were moving into this cold front. And so great views of, you know, our most common falcon, our smallest falcon, and also a featured bird at a different trail in the book. And so, you know, you kind of already know, if you practice, you know, expectations based upon the landscape. So again, this looked last week, nothing like it did in that initial photo. The ponds are mainly frozen. I learned last week from Carl that here in this section of the pond, it's spring fed, so it was open, and that's where we found several species of ducks. You know, I talk about, you know, your search images, you're moving around this, that, you know, when you get into the cottonwoods, when you get a shift from the narrowleaf cottonwood to the plains cottonwoods. I mean, I birded this with a friend last year. I couldn't believe what we saw. I think we spent a couple of hours, and an hour of it was just walking this like quarter-mile section, because there were waxwings and woodpeckers and nuthatches and flycatchers and all sorts of stuff. So depending upon the time of year, so you're kind of using your search images different here. And as I'm walking, I'm looking out. If this was open, I'd be looking for ducks and red-winged blackbirds and the cattails and great blue herons along the edges. And then when we get around to the west side, they have nesting boxes. So I'm looking for things in the summer like house wren and bluebirds. And the other thing too is I'll talk about, you know, don't forget, you'll hear me say this a lot, don't forget to scan the ridges. You know, if you're in kind of this foothills habitat for soaring birds like turkey vulture in the summer, or ravens. And, you know, I was surprised we didn't see a bald eagle last week, but we did have a red-tailed hawk fly over very quickly. And, you know, so just trying to kind of key you into, as you move through these landscapes, you know, not only directions on how to get from point A to point B, but also talking about, really assessing the landscape. And there is a list of common birds and common year-round birds, as well as, summer birds for some trails. Like at Walden Ponds, it's a great location in the winter for waterfowl. And so we get this big push of ducks in the winter months. And so you actually see a big list related to just winter as well. So, this emphasis on those common plants, the idea that, using search image was all came together. I'm real happy with the result. I say that it's 25 hikes that will make you a better birder. I'm a better birder from writing this book. I learned a tremendous amount about, really kind of taking it all in and how there's variation in these trails. And, we decided, I've gotten a lot of people say, why didn't you print the book? And I really did want to get it out last year, but also the fact that, so many people are walking with an app on their phones, and this, you can just download it right on your phone and you have the trail information right there. And we didn't have to deal with printing and shipping costs and paper. Ultimately, it was certainly a more sustainable choice. And so if you're not, where you can buy the book, the website is bestbirdinghikes.com. And then as I think Carl mentioned, this is a collaborative presentation tonight with Denver Audubon. So if you decide you'd like to buy the book, we're going to donate 10% of the proceeds to Denver Audubon to support them. And so so that we know that you got the book because of this, in your order notes, this is on a different page here. I've got this little thing here. When you're going to purchase the book, you'll see a section that says additional information and order notes. Just put in there Denver Audubon, and we'll make sure we tag that particular book sale to make sure that 10% goes to Denver Audubon. And that's kind of the book in a nutshell. And so, Carl, I'm happy to, I know there were probably some moderation, answer any questions and how you'd like to handle that. I'd love to be able to answer some questions for anybody that has them.
So far, the only question was, what was the website? And I put that in the chat box. If you don't have your chat box open, bottom of your screen, there's a little bubble that says chat, and that'll open your chat box, and you'll see the link for the link for her website. So one question is, would you name the 25 trails?
Not without buying the book. So you will have to buy the book to get the 25 trails. So that is part of it. And so I will tell you, that there are several state parks. One of the things I forgot to mention, Carl, Denver Audubon is one of the trails. I can give you a handful. I mentioned Lara the Bear is in there. Walden Ponds is in there because I bird there quite a bit. And it is one of the best birding locations in Boulder County by far. Rocky Mountain National Park, there's a trail in Rocky Mountain National Park. But the big thing is, I'm hoping that I don't want to give it all away in terms of that. One of the things that, that came away, one of the things I found with eBird, for anybody that uses eBird, and I highly recommend it, and there's a whole section on it in the book, is a lot of times you don't know where people are birding with respect to the trails. They may say, I birded at Cherry Creek State Park. Well, that's great, but where were you at Cherry Creek State Park? Were you at the marina, or were you hiking a trail? And so I will tell you, my eBird profile is public, and I bird every day, and I eBird every day, and I always list the location. So you can at least figure out, not necessarily where the 20, because I'm not just birding trails in the book, but anytime, that you find, if I'm birding a location, I try to be as specific as possible with respect to trail notes, the route I took, whether it was one-way distance, et cetera. And I encourage anybody else to do that as well, because it can get a little bit frustrating. It was one of the things I really noticed a lot was, okay, great, it's Cherry Creek State Park, but where at Cherry Creek State Park? And were you driving, were you hiking, what were you doing?
Do you have plans to publish a hard copy of the book?
Well, we'll see. We're working right now with Amazon in the sense of, it's a pretty niche market, right? It's not like I'm working on another book proposal right now that is actually across the US. And so that one, it makes the most sense to go with a publisher that's going to have wider distribution. we went back and forth. We're looking at, there is a print on demand option with Amazon. And so that's one of the things I'm doing in the next couple of weeks and trying to figure out if it becomes viable to do that. It's one of the things that I wasn't willing to give up. And even the publisher back when I pitched it 10 years ago had said, you know, this is going to be, if it sounds like you want a lot of color in the book, and that gets really expensive. And you can see it. I mean, there are other bird books that are in black and white, and not to knock those books, but it's cheaper to print. And I wanted this to be color. It was a really important aspect of this. I mean, I can't look at plant leaves in black and white and know what that plant is. I need to see it in color. And I wasn't willing to give that up. And so I need to see what the printing costs will be. But I will say it works really well. It's a small file size. The PDF is clickable. If you haven't, even if you're not an ebook user, try it in the PDF because it's just a PDF file and you can click on the trails and it goes right to it. And, you know, in that sense, I think the interface is very user-friendly.
Cool. Somebody was asking, I'm almost going to sound like a trucker here, but what's your handle on eBird?
It's just Sheridan Samano. I think it might be Sheridan S. I'm not sure on that. I think it's under my email address, so you can find me through Sheridan at reefstorockies.com too. I know it's tied to that email address, but I think it's Sheridan and then S. I think that's the eBird handle. Go to Sawhill Ponds today. I birded there this morning, and you can see my checklist, and then you can find it from that if you are.
Okay. One of our master birders or master birder graduates was commenting about the habitat approach, and that she really likes that. And it's, you know, you can learn more about the birds, you know, based on their habitat. And I know, about 3 or 4 classes ago in the master birder program, they really did start to focus on the plants and the habitats. So,
yeah, I think it's really important for sure.
Yeah, yeah. So when someone downloads the book, does it only allow you one download?
Yes.
So okay, so you can't put it on your phone and on your computer and on your.
No, but if you have an issue, because I have had people that say, well, actually, I decided I wanted it on my phone. Let me know. Reach out to me, and we'll make sure you have it so that you can download it to where you want, because people have done that and then realize, wait a minute, I don't want it on this device. So that's not an issue. We've done a lot of that. I've even done a lot of that this week. So.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's good. Because I know I put it on my computer, but it'd probably be more useful on my phone.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing too, is one of the things we didn't do is we didn't do trail maps in each chapter, mainly because every location has trail maps at the trailhead, and a lot of them also have print copy. And we just figured that was another way to, you know, you don't want to be using your phone necessarily for any sort of, if you don't know a place, you kind of want a hard copy of a map. And so it's one of the reasons too why we say, you know, make sure you pick up a map at the trailhead if you can, or at least take a photo of it, and, you know, that sort of thing. But I tried to be as specific as possible. And a lot of these are out and backs. That's the other thing too. So let's say it's a 3-mile trail. So you're going 1.5 miles in and back. I'll say, you know, the trail's still going. If you've got the time and you want to go, keep going. You know, it'll go another 2 miles or whatever, and you can make that decision. There's a trail in the Colorado Springs area that's less than 1 mile. So I say do it 2 or 3 times if you want. I mean, every time I do it, I see something different. It's a really short trail, and you can kind of loop it multiple times, and it's every time I see something different.
Yeah. Somebody did put, John, thank you for that. John put a link to your profile on eBird. So it's in the chat now.
Oh, good.
So you can even look and go see what it is.
Good. I should look.
Let's see. So someone has noticed big variations in the waterfowl counts in certain lakes and ponds, you know, with the varying freezing conditions. And so a lot of those ponds, I guess, like even our ponds, although we do have that spot where it seems to not freeze, where you were mentioning before, but a lot of these birds will then move over to the Platte River or Cherry Creek or some of the rivers instead. And actually, you know, South Platte Park is a good spot to go see waterfowl, because there's a lot of birds there, and there are ponds there. And I think when they freeze, they all just move to the ponds. Is there big variations in migration destinations and numbers year to year with the migratory northern Canadian ducks and diving ducks?
You know, I mean, we get a huge influx in the winter. I don't know historical data. That is certainly something you can look at with eBird. That's one of the things that eBird looks at. But I've noticed it this year. Now, I don't know. It's not the best tell because I'm birding locally more than I ever have on a daily basis because I'm home and I haven't been traveling really much for the last year. But Walden Ponds, Walden Ponds was one of the first places I ever went birding when I came to Colorado in '96. So I've been birding there for a long time. I don't remember ever seeing dry ponds where there are literally patches of dry. So that's got to be having an effect on these waterfowl. As you mentioned today, when I was leaving, there's a little private pond outside of the Sawhill Ponds entrance that was chock full of birds because it had open water. Or, I went to Hecla Lake yesterday, which is close to me. And again, bare patches of soil, but then also some bubblers that were keeping open water. But otherwise, they're going to be, as you mentioned, Carl, at places like the Platte, it's got open water and, that they can move into. And so, I don't know. I don't feel like it's a different year. I feel like what I'm seeing this winter is pretty similar. I always lead a December, the last bird walk we do for birding and beers is at the South Platte at 88. And that was pretty much the same this year for sure. And we saw some new things, but in terms of kind of usual suspects, but I know, it's been a dry year. It'll be real interesting to see how it plays out, but winter's a fantastic time to go out and practice your ducks because they're all in their breeding plumage. And so they look as good as they're going to look at this time of year while you're waiting for summer.
Yeah, I was surprised. I hadn't really seen redheads and hooded mergansers in our pond, and it was great to see them the other day.
Yeah, last week. We had redheads, exactly.
Yeah. So, any other questions? I haven't gotten any more yet. We can wait a few more minutes, and then we can wrap up.
Yeah, so Carl and I had talked a little bit too about the possibility in the future of me leading a walk specific to this particular hike at Chatfield, at Denver Audubon. And so keep an eye out for that as well. They have a really popular, it's been going on for years, their Walk the Wetlands, but with the limitations on group size right now, it's almost like we need a few more of those to limit everything to such small sizes.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. Yeah, the first Sunday of every month, we do a walk called Walk the Wetlands. And the one, we started them back up in February, and we limit to 6 people, and we had 20 people on the waiting list. So what we might do is alter that walk a little bit and increase the group size and just have the group split. So because we have a lot of wonderful master birders who are willing to help lead some of those, so it'll help us meet that demand, because I know there's probably definitely a pent-up demand for getting outside and going birding with other people. I think we all miss each other too. So someone has a question, thoughts about big raptors in Denver with habitat pressure?
I see a ton of raptor. I mean, I'm up in Boulder County, so it's a little bit different for me. I don't get into the urban landscapes. I don't know if you're seeing a difference, but the raptors, the common ones that we have, the year-round ones, red-tailed hawk, even bald eagle and great horned owls, they're generalists, and they're the ones we're going to see most often. They certainly, I haven't noticed a decline in those. I donated a winter raptor field trip for Denver Audubon spring auction last year, and we just did that field trip on Saturday for the winners of that. And we did the Boulder County Raptor Loop. It was fantastic. I mean, we had 4 golden eagles. We had, 20 red-tailed hawks, 5 bald eagles, 4 kestrels. I mean, all sorts of stuff, and just not a huge loop. And so the raptors seem to be doing okay. And hopefully, that continues to trend. What we did see what I thought was really interesting was after all the fires, there was certainly a shift. I remember seeing lots of reports just online of people getting kind of the foothills, the coniferous forest birds down in Denver. And we were certainly at Wanaka Lake seeing, red-breasted nuthatches and mountain chickadees and some of these other species that are typically a little bit higher up. So I think there was definitely displacement, at least temporarily, with the fires. The one thing is that, you know, given an opportunity, nature really has a great capacity for healing. So hopefully, you know, you know, these blips that we see, unfortunately, sometimes the news stories, even when it comes to wildlife, are the really the kind of the sad stories, when in reality, when you're out, I mean, I had some of the best wildlife sightings I've ever had in Colorado this last year. And that was early on, certainly because there was nobody on the trails, but that trend has not stopped. I'm still seeing fantastic stuff when I go out. So that's real positive, and trails are not uncrowded.
Nice. Someone was asking, you mentioned that walk from the our auction last year, the Raptor Walk. Where was that? Where did you go?
So it wasn't a walk. That's actually a drive. It's a pretty big area. It's called the Boulder County Raptor Loop. I don't know if it's Boulder Audubon. If you just Google Boulder County Raptor Loop and go to the images, you'll see the map. It's a really nice, they have it all mapped out. And I don't usually do the whole one, because usually when I do it, it's 2 to 3 hours. But it's basically from Niwot Road north to Rabbit Mountain, and the sequence kind of in that area. We started the drive, we met at Boulder Creek and 75th, so right at Walden Ponds area, and then went as far up to, was it St. Vrain Road, and then back over. So we didn't do a huge loop. We did miss a Loggerman Reservoir, which is usually really good for ferruginous hawks, and bald eagles is completely iced over. So we didn't really see anything there. That was a difference from years past, but otherwise, it was a really, really good drive. It's one you can do on your own. That's the other thing about the book, right? Is at least until we can get back, this is something you can do at your own pace. It tells you where to go. It tells you when to go. It tells you what to look for. So hopefully, you know, there's value in that as well.
Great.
I haven't been to the albino redtail. I'm not sure what that is. Oh, I think that bird died, actually. The leucistic redtail that was Broomfield area. I feel like that bird died last year. But I'm not sure if there's another comment that you're asking about there, but yeah, I have a friend who lives over in that area, and she used to see it all the time, and she was the one who told me that she thought it had died, but maybe they found it or something. So I'm not sure what happened there. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks, Carl, and everybody for your time tonight. I appreciate it. I hope everybody got something out of it, and you know, maybe we'll see you on a bird walk sometime soon. All right.
All right.
Sounds good. Have a good evening, everybody.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay,
thank you all.
bye.